I just was following my life, and it wasn't there in Hollywood.
When Hollywood couldn't get enough of her, and doors were flying open everywhere, she made the most shocking move of all. She vanished from the spotlight. By her late 20s, she already had 3 Oscar nominations, blockbuster movies that shaped a generation, and a reputation for fearless, unforgettable performances. Debra Winger wasn't just rising, she was dominating. Then, just as the applause grew louder than ever, she chose to walk away from it all. Long after she disappeared, the same questions refused to fade. Why step back when fame was at its brightest? Where did she go when everyone was watching? And what truly made her turn her back on a career Hollywood still desperately wanted? What follows is the untold truth behind Debra Winger's sudden exit, and the real story few ever heard. Long before Hollywood ever learned her name, Debra Winger was already fighting battles that had nothing to do with fame. Born on May 16, 1955, in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, she came into the world as Mary Debra Winger, raised in a Jewish family where her father, Robert, worked long days as a meat packer, and her mother, Ruth, kept things running as an office manager. But Ohio didn't stay home for long. While Debra was still young, the family packed up and headed west, settling into the wide, sun-bleached streets of California's San Fernando Valley. And even then, acting wasn't part of the plan. Instead of scripts and stage lights, she chose textbooks, enrolling at California State University Northridge to study criminology and sociology, a path she would never finish. At just 18, she left again, this time across the ocean, joining what she later called a typical youth tour of Israel, complete with stops at a kibbutz. Over the years, the story grew in interviews, sometimes sounding like she'd trained with the Israeli Defense Forces, before she eventually cleared it up and admitted it had simply been a standard trip, nothing more. Then, back in the United States, life took a brutal turn. One fall changed everything. Debra tumbled from the back of a truck and suffered a cerebral hemorrhage so severe it left her partially paralyzed and blind. For 10 long months, darkness became her world. Doctors warned her that her sight might never return. And it was there, trapped in silence and fear, that a future finally came into focus. If she survived, she promised herself she would chase something bold, not because it had always been her dream, but because staring at the possibility of never seeing again had forced her to decide what life was worth living for. Acting became that decision, not a childhood fantasy, but a vow made in the dark. When her vision slowly returned and her body began to heal, she didn't hesitate. Debra moved to Los Angeles and started auditioning immediately. The early roles were small, easy to miss, the kind most actors forget ever happened. In 1976, she appeared in a low-budget film called Slumber Party 57, and almost no one noticed. But television came next. She landed a 3-episode arc on Wonder Woman, playing Drusilla, Wonder Girl, the younger sister of Linda Carter's Diana Prince. The exposure was real, and the producers liked her enough to offer something rare, a recurring role. And that's when she made another risky choice. Debra said no. Not because she didn't want the work, but because she feared being trapped too early, locked into one identity before her career had a chance to breathe. She worried about being typecast, about becoming known for just one face, one costume, one role. So instead of playing it safe, she walked away, betting everything on what might come next. Years after her early TV days, she surprised everyone by showing up on Late Night with David Letterman in her full Wonder Girl costume, laughing at herself and owning the moment. Then, in 1978, she popped up in Thank God It's Friday, a disco comedy rushed out to ride the Saturday Night Fever wave. The movie faded fast, but Debra didn't. People were starting to notice her. Casting directors kept circling back to the same thing. There was something different about her. She had intensity. She took risks. She didn't fit the neat Hollywood mold of perfect beauty, and that made her more compelling, more real. Then came Breaking Through, and after that, the role that changed everything. In 1980, director James Bridges was putting together Urban Cowboy, a gritty love story set among Texas oil workers who spent their nights at Gilley's, the famous Pasadena honky-tonk, where cowboy hats, tight jeans, and mechanical bulls ruled the floor. John Travolta was already signed on. The female lead had first been offered to another rising star, but she passed. That opened the door for auditions, and Debra walked straight through it. She went head-to-head with another newcomer, Michelle Pfeiffer. Both were talented, both were hungry, but when the final choice was made, Debra got the part. On screen, she became a fiery, stubborn young woman who falls for Travolta's blood, rushes into marriage, and then refuses to be pushed around once the romance turns rough. And for the film's most unforgettable moment, she had to climb onto a mechanical bull in front of a packed crowd.
Instead of using a stunt double, Debra trained for weeks. She wanted to do it herself. And when that scene finally plays, it's not just a stunt. It's a statement. You can see it on her face. Pride, hurt, strength, all mixed together. She isn't just riding the bull. She's showing Bud exactly what he's losing. She's making it clear she won't shrink for anyone. That moment turned heads and sealed her as a star. Urban Cowboy exploded at the box office, pulling in more than $53 million in the U.S. alone. Debra earned 2 Golden Globe nominations, Best Supporting Actress and Best New Star of the Year, plus a BAFTA nomination. Critics praised how she added depth and emotion to a role that could have easily felt flat. Instead of playing it safe, she made it unforgettable. On set, sparks were flying, not the romantic kind. Director James Bridges later admitted that filming with Debra Winger almost blew up entirely. She refused to shoot a scene, forcing the crew to shut down for an entire day. Bridges was furious until he watched the footage and realized she had been right all along. The dialogue was off, and her gut instinct had saved the scene. This wasn't a one-off. That clash became a defining pattern in Debra's career. She cared fiercely about her craft, about getting it perfect and never cutting corners. Some called it professionalism, others called it difficult. But to Debra, it was simple. That's just the job. Celebrity, fame, it was all confusing, secondary to the work itself. 1982 brought both struggle and triumph. Debra appeared in 2 films that year. The first, Cannery Row, based on a John Steinbeck novel, paired her with Nick Nolte. But trouble dogged the production from the start. Raquel Welch was fired after just 8 days, and the movie tanked at the box office. Then came An Officer and a Gentleman, a film that would define Debra's career. She played Paula Pokorsky, a factory worker, opposite Richard Gere's naval officer candidate, Zach Mayo. The film's final scene, Gere carrying Debra out of the factory in his crisp dress whites, became an unforgettable cinematic moment. Yet behind the cameras, chaos reigned. Director Taylor Hackford clashed constantly with Debra, whom he found combative and unwilling to bend. She, in turn, called him one of the worst directors she ever worked with. And the tension wasn't limited to Hackford. Debra and Gere had on-screen chemistry that sizzled, but off-screen, they could barely stand each other. Louis Gossett Jr., who won an Oscar for playing Sergeant Emile Foley, later revealed the pair struggled through love scenes because of their mutual dislike. Debra later described Gere as a brick wall. Gere called her unpredictable and difficult. Despite the magic audiences saw on screen, the truth was clear. Great art sometimes comes from great tension. For years, Debra Winger stayed silent. When asked to do publicity for her next film, she flat out refused. She wouldn't pretend the conflicts behind the scenes didn't exist. Yet, despite all the tension, An Officer and a Gentleman became a critical and box office hit. It raked in $130 million domestically and earned multiple Academy Award nominations. At just 27, Debra was already being recognized as one of Hollywood's finest actresses. Then came something unexpected. After the film's success, she lent her husky voice to E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Uncredited, her tones were blended into the alien's iconic voice, a favor to Steven Spielberg and one of the strangest credits in her career. By 1983, Debra delivered what many call her career-defining performance in terms of endorsement. Directed by James Brooks, the film follows Emma Greenway, a woman navigating life under the shadow of her overbearing mother, Aurora. Shirley MacLaine played Aurora, Jack Nicholson the charming astronaut neighbor, and Debra brought Emma to life, a woman striving for independence while still loving a mother who couldn't let go. The role demanded she age from her 20s to late 30s, depicting marriage, motherhood, betrayal, and the heartbreak of a terminal cancer diagnosis. It was grueling, emotional work, and Debra threw herself completely into it. But once again, tension followed her. Debra and Shirley MacLaine clashed constantly. By 1983, MacLaine was Hollywood royalty, 4-time Oscar nominee, seasoned veteran, confident and unshakable. Debra, only 28 and on her second Oscar nomination, brought her own ideas about Emma, eager to shape the character her way. Sparks flew, and the result? Pure cinematic gold. On the first meeting, sparks flew. She questioned every choice, pushed back against direction, and refused to simply bow to the older actress. MacLaine showed up draped in luxurious fur coats, the very picture of Hollywood glamour. Debra? Combat boots, a miniskirt, and an attitude that said she was in charge of her own story. Two worlds collided, and from that moment, the tension was palpable. On set, it only intensified. Both women were up for Best Actress at the Oscars, and the media couldn't get enough. Mother versus daughter, old Hollywood versus new. When MacLaine won, she declared, "I deserve this." To many, it felt like a shot at Debra, though MacLaine later insisted otherwise. Yet, behind the headlines, Terms of Endearment became a triumph. 5 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actress for MacLaine. Debra, despite not taking home the gold, earned the National Society of Film Critics Award for Best Actress, a recognition of her raw talent, if not Hollywood's highest honor. By 28, with 2 Oscar nominations and no wins, Debra was earning a new reputation. Not just brilliant, but difficult. The label followed her, fair or not, shadowing every project she touched. The late 1980s brought work, but fewer triumphs. Legal Eagles in 1986, opposite Robert Redford, flopped. She openly criticized director Ivan Reitman as the second worst she'd ever worked with, hardly the way to make friends in Hollywood. Made in Heaven and Black Widow, both in 1987, barely made a ripple. Debra also turned down several roles that would become iconic. She passed on Fatal Attraction, which launched Glenn Close into superstardom. She walked away from Bull Durham, a hit for Susan Sarandon, and most famously, she dropped out of A League of Their Own, officially over creative differences, though whispers of tension followed. By then, she wasn't just an actress, she was a force of nature, uncompromising, fiercely talented, and unwilling to play the game Hollywood expected. Hollywood never forgets, and neither does it forgive. Debra Winger, one of the most fearless actresses of her generation, wasn't just talented, she was selective, and in a town built on compromise, that could be deadly. The truth, as Debra later admitted, was surprisingly simple. She refused to work with Madonna. To her, Madonna wasn't a serious actress, and that decision reshaped Hollywood history. Gina Davis stepped in, and the film went on to become a beloved classic. But that wasn't the only time fate intervened. For Peggy Sue Got Married, Debra was set to star opposite Nicolas Cage in Francis Ford Coppola's time travel romance. Just days before production, a bicycle accident left her with a back injury severe enough to force her out. Kathleen Turner took the role and earned an Oscar nomination. The pattern was unmistakable. Debra had strong opinions about directors, co-stars, scripts, and she wasn't afraid to voice them. In Hollywood, especially for women, speaking your mind came at a price. In a 1986 interview, Betty Davis told Barbara Walters that she saw a lot of herself in Winger, an actress already branded as difficult simply because she cared about the project. But understanding didn't erase the stigma. The label stuck. Casting directors became cautious. Directors didn't want the headache. Slowly, the golden roles began to dry up. Shadowlands brought her one more Oscar nomination, but the fire of opportunity was dimming. Hollywood had pushed one of its brightest talents to the sidelines. In 1993, Debra Winger stunned audiences once again, but this time the spotlight felt a little colder. She earned her third Academy Award nomination for Shadowlands, playing Joy Davidman, the fiercely intelligent American poet who captured the heart of C.S. Lewis. Starring opposite Anthony Hopkins, the film explored their improbable love and Joy's tragic battle with cancer. For the role, Debra transformed her performance, adopting a clipped New York accent, a sharp departure from her usual style. She breathed life into Joy, with intelligence, wit, and an independence that challenged Lewis's beliefs about faith and love. Critics were reminded why Debra had long been regarded as one of the most fearless, captivating actresses of her generation. Yet, the Oscars had other plans. She was nominated for Best Actress, but lost once more, this time to Holly Hunter for The Piano. It was her third Academy Award nomination without a win. At 38, the Hollywood spotlight was starting to dim, and coveted roles were becoming harder to come by. That same year, she earned a Golden Globe nomination for A Dangerous Woman, playing a mentally impaired woman struggling to navigate love and life. The performance showcased Debra's immense range and her uncanny ability to vanish into a character, but the limited release meant few people got to witness it. Even at the peak of her talent, the world seemed to be passing her by, proof that Hollywood's admiration doesn't always translate to opportunity. In 1995, Debra Winger did something nobody saw coming. She starred alongside Billy Crystal in Forget Paris, a romantic comedy about love surviving life's curveballs. Pleasant? Yes. Charming? Sure. Memorable? Not really. But that film would mark a turning point. It became her last movie for 6 long years. The decision wasn't sudden, it was decisive. While in Ireland, standing on a quiet road, she turned to a boyfriend at the time, actor Arliss Harwood, and said simply, "That's it, I'm done." She was 40 years old. By then, Debra had been in the industry for nearly 2 decades. 3 Oscar nominations decorated her name. She had given everything to the screen, yet the thrill had faded. In later interviews, she told People magazine that she had wanted out for years. The roles coming her way felt repetitive, uninspiring. She had already lived those characters, felt those emotions. Hollywood wasn't challenging her anymore, and she needed challenge. Motherhood weighed on her choices too. Her son, Noah, from her first marriage to actor Timothy Hutton, told the New York Times that his mother was a thoughtful parent. Balancing the demands of a high-powered career with raising children was impossible. Debra wanted to be fully present for her family, and she refused to shortchange either part of her life. Acting, she admitted, had been an accident. "I did not plan on it," she once said. In 1996, she married Arliss Howard, whom she met on the set of Wilder Napalm. Together, they had a son, Gideon Babe. And in 1997, Debra became stepmother to Howard's son Sam from a previous marriage. The family relocated to New York City, far from Hollywood's relentless glare. During her hiatus, Debra didn't sit idle. She lit up stage productions, taught as a teaching fellow at Harvard University for a semester, and devoted herself to environmental activism and charity. Most importantly, she raised her children. Her absence from film became more than a personal choice. It became a cultural talking point. Hollywood had lost one of its brightest stars, and the world couldn't stop asking, where did Debra Winger go? When Hollywood decided it had no place for women over 40, Debra Winger set out to uncover the truth in her documentary, Searching for Debra Winger. The film explored the harsh realities of ageism and sexism in Tinseltown, featuring candid interviews with actresses grappling with careers that seemed to have expiration dates. And, at the very end, Debra herself appeared, speaking honestly with Arquette about creativity, vitality, and the choices women make when the world tries to sideline them. The documentary shone a light on an uncomfortable truth. Hollywood didn't know what to do with talented actresses once they hit middle age. Debra hadn't been pushed out. She had stepped away on her own terms. Her return was quiet, deliberate, and entirely on her own schedule. In 2001, she re-emerged in Big Bad Love, an indie film written and directed by her husband, Arliss Howard. No red carpets, no headlines, just a woman reclaiming her craft. Over the following years, Debra chose projects that spoke to her, not to the box office. Radio, 2003, reunited her with Cuba Gooding Jr. in a heartfelt sports drama that critics panned. Eulogy, 2004, a dark comedy, barely made a ripple. Sometimes in April 2005, a harrowing story about the Rwandan genocide earned praise, but only a limited audience. Then came Rachel Getting Married, 2008, a small indie film directed by Jonathan Demme. Debra played a mother whose complicated relationships with her daughters formed the emotional backbone of the story. Anne Hathaway as the troubled daughter earned an Oscar nomination, while Debra's layered performance, full of regret, pain, and raw honesty, reminded audiences exactly why they had fallen in love with her decades earlier. This was the actress who had mesmerized the world in the 1980s, still capable of delivering devastating emotional truth. Debra Winger hadn't vanished. She had simply waited for the right stage, and when she returned, she reminded Hollywood exactly what it had been missing. When Debra Winger stepped onto Broadway in 2012, audiences weren't sure what to expect. She was making her stage debut in David Mamet's The Anarchist, sharing the spotlight with the legendary Patti LuPone. The two-character play didn't last long, closing after just 17 performances. But Debra had already proven something powerful. She could command a stage just as effortlessly as she did the silver screen. 4 years later, Debra surprised fans again, this time on Netflix. In 2016, she joined the cast of The Ranch, a laugh-track sitcom starring Ashton Kutcher, Sam Elliott, and Danny Masterson. It was a role nobody expected her to take. "I'd never done a traditional sitcom before," she told Entertainment Tonight. "It was something new, a challenge." The gamble paid off. The show ran for 4 seasons, giving Debra steady work while introducing her to an entirely new generation of viewers. By 2017, she was back to exploring love and complexity on screen. In The Lovers, she played a long-married couple struggling through a failing marriage, only to rediscover one another. It was her first romantic lead in 25 years, and at 62, Debra reminded audiences why her talent had captivated them decades earlier. She had grown wiser, more nuanced, a mix of realism and lingering romance. Even off-screen, Debra's charm endured. In 2011, she presented an award to Richard Gere, their mutual respect and grace shining through in a quiet, unforgettable moment.
Debra Winger wasn't just returning to acting, she was redefining it, proving that age, experience, and courage could create some of her most compelling work yet. At a time when Hollywood was obsessed with youth and fame, Debra Winger made a choice that shocked everyone. She walked away. In 2017, she spoke warmly about director Taylor Hackford, reflecting on their clashes during An Officer and a Gentleman, and admitting that despite the tension, the film had been a turning point in both of their careers. The feuds and fiery reputation that once followed her were fading into history, leaving only her undeniable legacy. Debra Winger never won an Academy Award, 3 nominations, 3 heartbreaks, yet her mark on cinema cannot be measured by trophies alone. In the 1980s, she became the face of something rare, a female character who wasn't just glamorous or charming, but real, layered, tough, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. She played women who craved love but refused to compromise who they were to get it. Then, at the height of her fame, at just 40, she walked away. In an industry that discards actresses as soon as they age out of ingenue roles, Debra chose her own terms over Hollywood's. She prioritized family, she raised her children, she lived life on her own schedule, and returned to acting only when she wanted, not when she had to. Even now, at 69, Debra continues to act selectively. She appeared in Kajillionaire in 2020, a reminder that her talent hasn't faded, it's just more deliberate. She's never shied away from speaking the truth about Hollywood, the sexism she endured, the label of difficult when male actors were called passionate, and the frustrating lack of meaningful roles for women over 40, a problem that stubbornly persists. Debra Winger's story isn't just about awards or fame. It's about a woman who refused to be defined by Hollywood's rules and created a legacy of strength, depth, and unapologetic authenticity. At a time when most actresses would do anything to stay in Hollywood's spotlight, Debra Winger did the unthinkable. She walked away. Her career wasn't built on playing it safe. She spoke her mind when silence might have been wiser. She turned down opportunities others would have chased. Those choices cost her fame, but they gave her something far rarer, a life on her own terms. Debra Winger didn't care about chasing box office numbers or collecting awards. She wanted roles that mattered, stories that resonated, characters that left a mark. And by that standard, she succeeded beyond measure. She became one of the greatest actresses of her generation, earning 3 Oscar nominations before hitting 40. So, what really happened to Debra Winger? Why did Hollywood's rising star vanish when she was just getting started? The answer isn't simple, and it's more fascinating than anyone imagined. At the height of her fame, when Hollywood wanted her more than ever, Debra Winger did the unthinkable. She walked away. The roles no longer inspired her, and her family needed her in a way the movie industry never could. Years later, she returned, but on her own terms, making films that sparked her passion instead of chasing awards or box office glory. She never won an Oscar. She never became a Hollywood legend celebrated at Lifetime Achievement galas. Yet she lived a life entirely her own, made films that mattered, and proved there's more than one way to define success in Hollywood. Debra Winger's story isn't about fame, awards, or ticket sales. It's about knowing your values and having the courage to follow them, even when the world thinks you're making a mistake. Sometimes the boldest move an actress can make isn't staying in the spotlight, it's stepping away, living quietly, and only returning when it truly matters. The shocking truth about Debra Winger isn't her awards, it's the moment she walked away from it all. She chose herself, and that bold choice, more than any Oscar, is what truly defines her legacy.